afraid about the police brutality.
Violence in the streets following the shooting days ago of a young unarmed black man.
They say a woman's place is in the home, and I suppose as long as she's in the home, she might as well be in the kitchen.
Women were sworn in as senators. For the first time ever, 20 U.S. senators.
I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Hello, my name is David Pilgrim, and you're watching Expect Diversity. This is one of the most exciting shows, I think, at least ones that I'm excited to do, Franklin, because it tells a story that needs to be told. We're going to begin telling the story of a relationship between Hampton, what is today Hampton University, and what was a long time ago Ferris Institute. I have as my guest, my colleague, my friend, and the primary researcher. What is your name?
My name is Franklin Hughes, and okay. I appreciate the kind words. I work in your office as a multimedia specialist, okay. And other duties as assigned, I suppose.
Okay, and how long have you been at Ferris?
This will be 5 years next month, I believe.
Wow, that went by fast.
Yes, yes.
So, start us out. Tell us, what is this story?
Well, this story is a relationship that Mr. Ferris, or the Ferris Institute, had with Hampton University, or Hampton Institute, back in the early 1900s. So from about 1910 to 1928, a number of African American students came here to take special preparatory courses. And what was significant about a lot of these students is that they went on to do amazing things in American history, as far as Supreme Court, trying cases before the Supreme Court, and being publishers or editors of major newspapers. And so a lot of it started with the progressiveness of Mr. Ferris providing opportunities to people who didn't have opportunities in other places.
Okay. So let's look at it. It's 1910.
1910, yeah.
Ferris has been in existence for
since 1884, yeah.
Since 1884, so, 3 decades or so. And you have this president, and a president and founder of the school, Woodbridge Nathan Ferris. He already has international students here.
Right, yeah, we found some documentation that says that that was in 1903 that Mr. Ferris said for the past 10 years, that would be before 1900s, that there was international students here from various countries, from Albania, from Mexico, from Europe as well. But there were special English courses, ESL, English as a Second Language courses for those students.
Okay, so this school, it's weird because we just finished our diversity and inclusion plan, and Mr. Ferris, who I don't think ever used the word diversity, ever used the word inclusion, he was living it.
Correct.
And so he brings in, I'm guessing they were either all men or mostly men. Yeah. At least that we know of so far.
Yeah, of the Hampton students.
Of the Hampton students, yeah. Right. And they come here. So why did, other than Mr. Ferris, why didn't they just stay at Hampton?
Well, and you can probably speak more to this as well, though. But Hampton at the time in the South, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for African Americans to go to get higher education. Now, Hampton Institute was more of a technical, or not a technical, but more of a trade type of school. So trades were taught, and not the poetry, not the fine arts that would get you into college higher education institutions. But Ferris would provide those preparatory courses that students could take and then go on to University of Michigan, Northwestern, Michigan State, and so on. Okay,
so before we get into some of the individuals, who, by the way, are some of the most accomplished people, from any institution, what do you think the reception was in the Big Rapids area?
Well, during our research, we have found that in the 20s, there was
well, the Klan
was here.
Big Rapids was a hotbed of Klan activity.
But prior to that, and even during that time, this area is a very interesting area, because you have Remus area, which you have a lot of African American settlers that lived in the Remus, Mecosta area for years, started by Isaac Berry, who was an escaped slave in the 1800s. You have Baldwin and Idlewild, which was African American resort towns. And so then you have Big Rapids, which is kind of in the middle of those two places, where Mr. Ferris is providing opportunities for African Americans. So I think there was probably some positives and some
Yeah.
negatives. I mean, you're infusing people into a community that was mainly white, but you did have some African Americans in the area.
Well, and the U.S. was in the middle of Jim Crow.
Correct.
And so you had a, you know, I think Mr. Ferris was ahead of the country.
Yeah.
You know, as we've done this research, one of the things I think is I sound like I'm from advancement in marketing now. I am so proud to work at the college or the university or the institute, I should say institute, college, university, that man founded. As you know, he brought Ferris students together, and they read excerpts from W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington.
Right.
And those two guys didn't always get along, right?
Correct.
I mean, Booker T. Washington was like, do trades, you know, because he's telling black people, don't worry about voting, don't worry about fighting discrimination, worry about a job and feeding your family. And then you have W.B. Du Bois who's saying, you know, we want all the rights, including the right to a liberal education. Right. And then you have Mr. Ferris. And you have a quote.
Yeah, I do. So in 1915, there was a Michigan Manual of Freedmen's Progress, which was a commission that Mr. Ferris, as governor, did to study the achievements of African Americans for 50 years post-slavery. And it was commissioned by him through the state of Michigan. But he says something interesting here. He says, I commend most heartily the magnificent work of Booker T. Washington. He is training men and women to become useful and indispensable in the great industrial world. Du Bois adds to Booker T. Washington's program a higher claim. If I understand him, he would never fail, even in the country school, to give the boys and girls an appreciation of poetry, music, and painting of the masters. Take out of life its poetry, its music, its painting, its drama, and there is little left that is worthwhile.
Yeah. So there you have Mr. Ferris bridging the gap between those two. So let's move into a couple of the people. As we said, there were, you know, several dozen of these individuals who came up from Hampton, took courses at Ferris. Some graduated from Ferris. Some just took college prep courses and moved on. But let's, you know, to your research, and again, I want to commend you. I came to this later. I'm trying to catch up. So let's look at, I think they have us starting with Gideon Smith. Gideon Smith is reputed to be the first African-American student at Ferris State. Is that true?
Well, I don't know. Yeah. What I will say is while Gideon Smith was here in 1910 through 1913, there was another African-American student here named Frank Roberts, who was in the pharmacy program. He graduated. He was from Benton Harbor, St. Joe area. He graduated in 1912, opened a pharmacy in Detroit for 35 years. But Gideon Smith is, if he's not the first, he's one of the first. Yeah. So he was here at the same time. And it's interesting that recently we possibly found out that there could have been an earlier connection with athletics and Michigan football and Mr. Smith.
Well, go ahead and say that. I mean,
okay, well, we found that in 1902 and 1903, some Negro League baseball teams came and were up here in Big Rapids, which you have, what is it, the Columbia Giants, Columbia Chicago Giants, and the Page Fence Giants. But one of the players, his name is Nate Harris, and it is reported, which we still have to verify if this is true or not, that Nate Harris, during the off season of baseball, coached the Big Rapids College Preparatory team. So that would make it Ferris.
That would make it Ferris. Which would, by the way, make him, what's his name?
Nathan Harris.
Nathan Harris. Probably the first African-American employee. So that's the exciting part of just discovering all of this history. By the way, you see that picture behind you? I don't know if you can see it on the screen. Diane Cleland, who works over in the Jim Crow Museum, is painting paintings of several of these Hampton Ferris people, and we're going to spread these out across the whole campus. I mean, if someone wants one, all they'll do is tell us they want it. So Gideon Smith comes here. He plays football.
Yes.
And by the way, is a great football player.
He's a great football player, and he actually, after he finished Ferris, he went on to the MAC, which is Michigan Agricultural College, which became Michigan State University. Okay. And he starred there at Michigan State, where he was the first African American to play sports or play professionals or
at the highest level, varsity sports.
At Michigan.
So he's the so I'm sure Michigan State is proud of their relationship with him.
Yes.
You know, and Now, he recently received an award.
Yes, he received 2014 Trailblazers Award from, what is it, the coaches, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, it's one of the national
The National Coaches
associations, yeah.
Association Trailblazer Award in 2014, because after his football playing career, he coached at Hampton for many years.
And was a great coach.
Right, was their winningest coach until their most recent
and he wasn't just a coach.
Right, yes.
He also was a teacher.
He was a teacher. He taught chemical sciences at Virginia State College before it was Virginia State University, prior to coaching at Hampton.
Yeah, and you know, you read some of the accounts of Gideon Smith in the newspapers of the time. Of course, now we're reading, you know, what are we talking, 1915, 16, all those periods. And people refer to him as the charcoal something, or the coal black whatever. I mean, this is where we've come, you know, how far we've come as a society. But even though they use those adjectives, they're clear about him as a football player, and they're clear about him as a person. And Mr. Ferris, he not only admitted these students to Ferris, but he actually became an advocate for them.
And he wrote a letter. I mean, there's a published letter in the New York Age newspaper in 1915 that Mr. Ferris wrote to Gideon Smith, and telling him how proud he is of him as a man, and as an athlete, and as his dedication and his spirit. I mean, there were just very glowing terms and phrases used that Mr. Ferris used to publicly write Gideon Smith and tell him these things, and tell him that the whole university or the whole Ferris Institute was behind him and supporting him.
Yeah, and again, that's not the only student he did that for.
No.
I mean, Mr. Ferris went way beyond writing letters of reference.
Correct.
I mean, he went to bat for these students, and he helped them, and they in turn did some great things. So let's turn I want to say something. One other thing I would say about Gideon Smith, that he was the reason, I believe, we got to get our story straight. And by the way, when you say we, it's kind of confusing to the audience because I'm the other part of the we.
Right.
But when we got started, the idea was to find a way to commemorate the life of Gideon Smith.
Right.
Because we had thought about building a bust or a painting, and in the process of you looking for something, you started discovering, so you'd come back and I'd go, well, who's that black one? And who's that black one? And then we start figuring out, oh, there's another one, and there's another one. Well, and that might be one. I mean, you just started looking at all of this, and then the story just unfolded. Right. So we can come back to Gideon Smith, but let's talk about one of the people that you could make the argument is one of the most acclaimed of this, and that would be Bedford Lawson.
Belford Lawson.
Belford Lawson.
Yeah, Belford v. Lawson, yes. Belford v. Lawson attended Ferris in, 1919 to 1920. And we don't know much about his time here at the Ferris Institute, which provides more opportunities for us to study our own history to find out about him here. But after he left the Ferris Institute, he went to the University of Michigan, where he played football, and he was reportedly a tremendous football player, but he was caught in the Jim Crow politics and the Jim Crow attitudes, as Fielding Yost was the coach of the Michigan varsity football team, and didn't allow Mr. Lawson to get much playing time at all. Now, prior to him becoming a varsity player, when he was on the JV type of level college team at University of Michigan, he was reported in newspapers as being a superstar, as being a star halfback, but he was also an national award-winning orator. So here you have this early 20-year-old African-American man from Virginia who came up here to Ferris to get some college preparatory, then go to University of Michigan, is facing Jim Crow, not able to really show his skills on the football field, but then shows his other talent, which is an oration skill, and he's winning national awards. So, but after that, he went on, finished his degree at University of Michigan, went on to Yale University, and he received a law degree. And Belford Lawson is one of the most accomplished men in the United States. I mean, he was the first African American to argue and win 2 cases before the United States Supreme Court.
And I want you to slow down. I want to make sure our audience hears that. No, I just want them to hear that. The first African American to argue and win cases before the United States Supreme Court. So the answer to that question is not Thurgood Marshall.
Correct.
All right, although they did have. Well, they got sideways a couple times, but they had a relationship.
They worked together on a number of cases. I mean, if you read many instances of Thurgood Marshall's history, you're going to see Belford Lawson peppered in there because they worked together. They, like you said, they got sideways on a couple of issues, a couple of cases, but they worked through them. And but yeah.
So, and of course, given the time, he would have had lots of opportunities to work on civil rights, sort of legislation. He would have had an opportunity to, because he was prominent, so
Right.
he would have worked with some of the people that we studied during Black History
Right.
Month. So he would have spent time with Dr. King.
Right, yeah, we have pictures of that, of Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, actually, there's a picture there with him next to Dr. King.
Yeah.
And he's not photoshopped in. I mean, he's actually in the picture, right?
Correct.
And he's also, I think, with a young Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy, yes. He worked
Yeah.
on one of his senatorial campaigns.
Okay, all right.
He and his wife.
Right, and so this is a guy who helped shape civil rights legislation, who was himself a human rights and a civil rights activist. And I know I sound like I'm just, a cheerleader here. I'm just, the guy walked around Ferris, and I asked myself, why don't we have a photograph, pictures? Well, I'm gonna fix the painting part, but we named rooms after Whitney Young. I got nothing but love for Whitney Young, but we named a room after Whitney Young. You could have gone this way.
Well, these are great opportunity stories. These show the core of what Ferris is about. I mean, Ferris offers opportunities that really, frankly, if a lot of these guys would have stayed in industrial schools at Hampton or at Hampton Institute, they might not have had this chance to be what they became.
Well, that's true, frankly, because if you look at the curriculum, no disrespect, Hampton is today a great university.
It is.
It's not. I mean that's sincere. It is a great university. But at the time, you might have been taking courses in poultry management.
Yes, or shipbuilding,
yeah.
which they have. There's benefits to that.
Yeah.
But as W.B. Du Bois spoke about, that there's a higher calling.
Yeah.
That there's higher education value that African Americans should have the opportunity to achieve. And Ferris is one of the ways that these guys are able to do that.
Absolutely. So let's move quickly and take it. I want to make sure we get through. I see we have. Let's try Russell Dixon.
Okay. Well, Russell Dixon is an interesting fellow. He came to Ferris in 1921 through 1923. There's numerous. What is it called? Numerous reports that Mr. Ferris mentored him and kind of encouraged him and supported him to go on to pursue his dental degree or advanced dental degree at Northwestern University. Now it's interesting because he wasn't the first one from Ferris to go to Northwestern. We found a number of African American gentlemen from this Hampton group that went to Northwestern, but Russell Dixon was the first to get the advanced degree at Northwestern University. And that's significant too because he went back to Howard University, and Mr. Dixon became the dean of dentistry at Howard University, which for a period of time produced half of all of African American dentists in the United States. Yeah. And he was the dean of the college, and he was a young dean.
It was a great college.
It was.
It was a great program.
It is still.
Yeah. And what is it, dean for like 35 years?
35 years. Yes.
So I don't know how we can check this. That might be the longest dean of a dental school someplace in the country, and of course, like all of them, served on national boards and the like. And what else can you tell me about him?
Well, again, he served at Howard University for 35 years. Mr. Ferris did advocate for him to go to Northwestern. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, he was also appointed as a regent to the National Medical Library by Kennedy in the 60s.
Well, you know what I'd like to do, because we have a little time. Well, I know one question. We have to at least broach this a little bit. Why now? I mean, if Mr. Ferris did this, brought these young African Americans here in 1910, 1928. He died himself in 1928. By the way, shortly after coming back from Hampton.
Where he was speaking at Hampton's Founders Day.
Okay, so that's brilliant, isn't it?
Mr. Ferris was there at Hampton Institute speaking at their Founders Day. Right. And there's a report how he gave a riveting speech and had everyone's apt attention. Yeah. And I would have loved to hear him as an orator.
Oh, absolutely. I think Mr. Ferris was great because he was always right. I think he had that kind of Pilgrim thing going where I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm certain.
Yeah. And if I'm wrong, I sound like I'm
right. That's right. And he spoke from conviction. So, but you're right. So he died in 1928, and quite frankly, this program.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we don't really know. I mean, as we really don't know how it really started, too.
Right.
So there's more research opportunities where we have to find specifically how it started, but then also how it ended. But I think one of the things that contributed to it was after Mr. Ferris died, MassLink took over, but within a year, he passed away as
Right.
well.
Right.
And there's reports that MassLink was involved in some
Yeah.
of these
Yeah.
things that Mr. Ferris was doing. I mean,
Right.
he served as president, acting president,
Right.
when Mr. Ferris was as a senator and the governor. So MassLink would have probably been on board with a lot of these things. But if you have your two main heads
Right.
die within a year, I think that puts a lot of strain on a program. But the other big key component to it, I think, was the Great Depression.
Right.
There's sentiment and there's books written about northern philanthropy organizations cutting back and stopping philanthropy to African Americans because, frankly, they didn't want to train African Americans to do jobs when they didn't have jobs.
Right.
And so I think some of that ends because of that. But also, I think Hampton, which is a great university
Right.
now, was then starting to see the benefit of offering more arts,
Right.
more liberal arts types of programs
Right.
and intellectual programs to their
Right.
curriculum.
Well, and you're right. And so, you know, it ended.
Yes.
But one of the things to remember is in the 19-teens, 1920s, this was a time in the United States when the general census among many Americans was that education spoiled black people.
Yeah.
That did it spoil you, boy? Did it spoil you? That education spoiled black people, that it ruined them because it made them unwilling to do menial tasks, field labor and the like, and made them have ambitions which could not be met in a Jim Crow culture.
Correct.
And so here you have, I thank God, I mean that as an actual prayer of thanks, that Mr. Ferris spoiled not just those kids, but also poor white kids and people from other nations and all, that they came here to be, and there's nothing wrong with good hard manual labor, that's not what I'm saying, but that he gave them an opportunity to become doctors and lawyers and Percival Prattis, who we don't have up here, you know, that's, briefly tell us about Prattis, who certainly changed the world.
Yeah, Percival Prattis was another Ferris student, a Hampton Ferris student who came here in 1916, 1917, but he went on to start or to work for the Pittsburgh Courier and became the executive editor, which the Pittsburgh Courier was the most publicized, the most highly distributed African American newspaper in the United States. It was number one.
Yeah.
Which
and most influential.
Most influential,
yeah.
Yes. And you know, Percival Prattis also started one of the first African American newspaper in Grand Rapids called the Michigan State Times, which we haven't been able to find any copies of yet, but we're still looking, trying to find those things. But then he also worked for the Chicago Defender, which would have been what second or the third most influential African American newspaper.
Well, they think they were first, but
well, he was an editor there, and then he went on to the Pittsburgh Courier. But
and remember now, as a reporter, he traveled the world, interviewing Haile Selassie, interviewing the heads of all these other nations, and he became the first African American to be admitted to the press corps.
Yeah, to the press galleries.
Yeah, the press galleries of the
the House and the
absolutely.
The Senate,
So today, when I'm looking at press, gathering, and I see 8, 10, 15 peoples of color, but there was a first one.
Right. And
Percival Prattis was that person, and he not only interviewed people, but he befriended.
Yes.
And again, in his own way, was a mentor and colleague to people like, some of the civil rights leaders.
Right. Yeah. He was. It's reported that he was friends with W.B. Du Bois.
That's deep.
And there's documents of correspondence with mail back and forth. And actually, but Du Bois as well with Percival or with Belford Lawson. There's conversations and cordials where that they know each other's families.
Right.
And so so these guys had influence with influential people all over the United States.
Yeah. So again, just quickly though, why now? Why are we? This started in 1910, basically ended in 1928. What year is this? 2016. 2016. What happened? I mean, why are we doing this now? Why is this an important story to be told now?
Well, I think it's important for our students to and even African American students or all students to know that you belong here.
Yeah.
That this institute has always been an institute of opportunity, and we need to get back to that. We need to get back to the roots because The Ferris Institute was different than most places in the United States in
Right.
the early 1900s and 19 teens and 1920s. And while there was turmoil and there's racism and there's Jim Crow and other places, Ferris seemed to be doing things differently. And I think that's a pattern and that's a path that we should take in today's day and age, where you have a lot of issues, a lot of racial tensions, a lot of issues, and you have protests and you have just, I don't know, just a lot of issues. And I think Ferris can take the leadership to be different than everyone else, and we can embrace each other and try to celebrate these stories, and these are our stories. These are our stories of the Ferris Institute.
Well, when I first got to Ferris, this was my understanding of African American experience at Ferris. Gideon Smith and the protest in the 1960s. I didn't know there was anything else that occurred between it. Now, the truth of the matter is, those first young men that came here, they did face discrimination. Matter of fact, Massling said they faced bitter prejudice outside. And that was even more important, shows even more how important the role Mr. Ferris played, because he's fighting the whole, country.
Well, when Mr. Ferris even speaks of a situation where a female student was being discriminated against by some of the Ferris Institute other female students because she was African American, and he addressed them at the morning exercises and said, "I thought we were living in Michigan, not Louisiana."
That's right.
And he chastised the school for treating people this way, because that's not how this institution is supposed to be, and that wasn't his values.
Yeah, and I tell you what, if you tell Mr. Ferris's story, and you don't tell the story of him as an activist, in let's say as social justice, then you're not telling the whole Mr. Ferris story.
Right.
You're just not doing it. And then we get to the 1960s, and there's there's the conflict, and it was huge. Congress people were involved, and it stunned me the other night. I was reading, we shared this piece where there was not a single African American professor, and this was like in the 1960s. And today I look around and I look at some of the new hires, and obviously hiring a diverse workforce is still a challenge for us. But this is my point on this. When we do the right things, whether it's hiring candidates from different groups or at least giving them a shot, where we build courses and classrooms that are open and inclusive, when we do all of that, we honor Mr. Ferris. When we don't do that, we dishonor him.
Correct.
And so that's a part, for me, part of the story. Listen, what would you like to leave with? I mean, you said the piece about the belonging piece, but how has this story affected you? I mean, you're going to go down in history.
Well, I don't know about that.
In a previous I don't believe in previous lives, but you were from Hampton. So how has this impacted you doing this?
Well, it's just given me pride in this place. I mean, I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to discover these stories. And what I would like is for us to reestablish this connection with Hampton. I mean, what better thing? We both have this history together, which was different than the rest of the country. So why can't we reestablish some kind of connections and have some of our students experience HBCUs, and have some students from HBCUs experience our campus? And yeah, I just think, and I would just also want the students to know that take advantage of your opportunity. I mean, we don't all have opportunities, but when we do have opportunities, we need to take advantage of it. I used to tell my kids that in sports. When you get your opportunity to get out there, do it. But these guys took advantage of their opportunity, and they did amazing things, and we have the student body here that can do the same thing.
Okay. And we need to reach out, you said, to Hampton. Maybe one way to do that would be at Founders Day, at one of these Founders Days coming up. At the most recent Founder Day, I was very proud with you to introduce this story to the campus. And I can tell you this, we do a lot of things in our lives, and we have different projects and whatever. This has been probably the coolest thing. I want to thank you for your initiative, your hard work, and also I want to thank you for being up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, because I send you something
answering your
and
emails.
answer my emails, and it's been fun working on with this. And this school is better because the story happened, and it's better when people know the story. So thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.